So everyone knows
This meeting is being recorded.
we are going to record today's program. So welcome everyone. I'm Kathleen Warshawski and you are at SBB University Caregiving Resources. Today we're going to talk about reclaiming your sexuality during and after caregiving. Our speaker today is Dr. Tanginika-Simone Cuascud. She's a clinical sexologist and sexual health consultant. I'd like to thank all of our hosts for today's program: Seniors Blue Book, The Senior Source, Caregiver SOS, WellMed Charitable Foundation, and SBB University. I would like for Kimberly Knight, Director of the Caregiver Support Program at the Senior Source, to go ahead and tell us a little bit about their program. Kimberly, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much, Kathleen. As she said, my name is Kimberly Knight. I'm the Director of Caregiver Support Program at the Senior Source here in Dallas, and we focus on just making older better. We are a nonprofit organization, and our goal is to support seniors in our community to just age well and at home or in long-term care communities or wherever they may be living. The Caregiver Support Program offers support groups and care coordination, counseling, referrals. We do education programs like what we're having today and other workshops. We also have durable medical equipment and incontinence supplies, and we are just here to help in any way that we can a caregiver and their caregiving journey. So if you have any questions or concerns or want us to come alongside you and help out in any way or need any of these services, please give us a call. We can be contacted at 214-823-5700. You can call me directly, which is my phone number is 214-525-6155. And we just look forward to supporting you as we've always done in the community through the Senior Source. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Very informative. Next, we have Kathleen with Seniors Blue Book. That would be me. So Seniors Blue Book is a comprehensive resource guide for the Dallas area. We have over 90 categories of resources for you to help someone that you love. For the professionals who are joining us on this call, we also have our Discharge Planners Resource Notebook. And it is a resource that complements the book that's designed for discharge planners. The book itself is available in print or online, and you can find them at grocery stores in the area, at Tom Thumb, Whole Foods, Market Street. Usually they're at the front of the store. And then you can also find them at senior centers and libraries. If you are unable to locate a book, you can actually view it online at sbbdallas.com, and I will put that in the chat. I'll put that link in the chat for you so that you can find them. And you can search online, you can look for activities, events like this one that we're having today. There's also in-person events, there's educational articles. We have all kinds of resources to help you help someone you love, as well as to help yourself. So I'm Kathleen with Seniors Blue Book, Resources for Aging Well. Next, we have Miss Tina Smith. She is the Director of Caregiver Program Operations at WellMed Charitable Foundation. Tina, are you on the call? Can you tell us a little bit about your Caregiver SOS program?
Sure can. Thank you very much for having me, and welcome everybody. And just can't say how glad I am that you're here today. It's so important to give yourself a little learning and community with other caregivers. But as Kathleen said, I am with the Caregiver SOS program through the WellMed Charitable Foundation. Our goal is to provide, and like Kimberly and Kathleen, is to provide caregivers the tools that you need to keep on doing the important job that you're doing. And so with the Caregiver SOS program, we have caregiver specialists who can provide that one-on-one consultation, give you guidance, help find resources in the community that might be able to provide you assistance, and just be a listening ear as well. We have support groups as well, and stress management classes. Our caregiver teleconnection program, these are hour-long learning sessions that we do over the phone. We have a wide range of topics talking about stress management techniques, how to avoid burnout, all the way to dementia care, caring for somebody with dementia and learning how to manage some of those behaviors and just understanding the disease as a whole. And then our stress busting program, this is an evidence-based program, and it's a 9-week course, hour and a half a week, where we teach caregivers stress management techniques and coping skills as it relates to caregiving. All of our services are free and they're open to the community. And so if you have any questions or would like to explore our resources further, you can certainly give us a call. Our numbers are at the bottom, but you can reach us at 866-390-6491, or you can email us at caregiversos@wellmed.net. Thank you all and enjoy the session today.
Thank you, Tina. Great information. For those who are seeking continuing education credits for today's program, there are a few disclosures that we have to go through. The first one is you must register via Zoom with an email address, participate in the Q&A discussion, and attend the entire webinar program. We will be offering 1 contact hour for social work and for LPC. Certificates will be sent via email in 2 to 3 weeks. Conflicts of interest, there's no relevant professional, personal, or financial relationship related to the planning or implementation of this activity. There's no commercial support received for today's activity. There has been some financial support. Ms. Patricia, if you would mute, please. If you all will excuse me while I just, oh, there we go. The event has received some financial support from the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging. The CNE activity has been hosted by WellMed Charitable Foundation, the Senior Source, and Seniors Blue Book, and the continuing education credit is provided by Seniors Blue Book. Event hosts and sponsors did not influence the program content today. And if you all will excuse me one moment, I'm just going to try to mute Miss Patricia here because it's a little distracting for us, although I can't find her in the list. There we go. There. All right. And now to talk about the purpose of today's program is to increase the knowledge of the healthcare professional in the areas of caregiver sexuality to increase support for caregivers. Objectives: at the end of today's program, the participant will be able to identify one strategy to deal with the complexities and challenges associated with a caregiver staying sexually active and/or reclaiming intimacy for themselves and within their relationship in spite of the demands of caregiving, and to state one bias associated with maintaining a healthy and active sex life that a caregiver may need to overcome. And now I will ask Ms. Kimberly Knight to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much. I have the absolute honor today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Tanginika-Simone Cuascud. She's a clinical sexologist, sexual health educator, and surrogate partner therapy facilitator, founder and principal of Texas Sexual Health in North Texas, USA, and the sexual health provider at Renewal Medical Centers of North Texas in Dallas. She works with individuals and couples of any sexual orientation or identity and uses a multidisciplinary and sex-positive approach to find solutions for sexual dysfunctions and intimacy concerns. She's board certified by the American College of Sexologists. She's a member of the World Association on Sexual Health, the International Society on Sexual Medicine, and is an ambassador of the American Sexual Health Association. Currently, she is the VP of the Association of Hispanic Leaders and past chair of the School Health Advisory Council in her child school district. She has been a contributor for multiple magazines, radio, TV news shows, and her expert advice has been featured in several publications and news outlets in the USA and all over the world. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the very capable hands of Dr. Tangi.
Thank you, Kathleen and Kimberly, for that nice introduction. And I'm very, very happy to be here for multiple reasons. Some of them actually personal, because I have been a caregiver myself. And so this is something that is touching me personally as I also go through the process of caregiving. And this is a topic that I know is very dear to the hearts of many, not only who are offering support to caregivers, but for those people who are in a position of caregiving. Please, next slide. So thank you very much to our hosts for kindly inviting me to talk about this topic. And I do this very willingly and very happily. And I wish that this relationship can continue. We can continue to shed light on this wonderful and very important topic. Please, next. So as I was introduced before, my name is Dr. Tanginika Cuascud. People know me as Dr. Tangi or Dr. T, for those who have a little trouble with the mouthful that my name is. I'm a board certified clinical sexologist, sexual health educator, and surrogate partner therapy facilitator. I help people recover sexual function first and foremost, but I also coach individuals in clinical practice to have healthy intimacies in spite of sexual dysfunction, health issues, disability, mismatched libidos, low sex drive, and life changes, among other challenges. My population is mainly 55 and over, so I know the tribulations and challenges not only of aging as it pertains to sex and intimacy, but most importantly, as it pertains to caregiving, which is the topic that we have at hand today. I truly believe that sexual health is a right of all and strive to empower people to design and live the sex lives they envision and deserve. And sometimes that is easier said than done, but it is a very rewarding job and something that I'm very passionate about. Please, next. So topics for today, we're going to talk about some of the challenges of caregiving, what happens to sexuality during caregiving, how to reconnect to one's sexuality while and after caregiving, how to reconnect to one's partner while caregiving, reinitiating intimacy and reclaiming one's sexuality after caregiving, and some general strategies for overall health and well-being, followed by questions and answers that we have received some, and I welcome more if the audience has more questions. Something that I want to, for you all to take away today is number one, to acknowledge and to spark conversations about the importance of sexual and intimacy needs of caregivers that many times are ignored or dismissed. So today I would like to invite us all to have greater understanding, empathy, and compassion towards those sexual needs of caregivers, to provoke thought and action on communicating about sexual and intimacy needs when or while caregiving, and how to have those conversations about what our expectations and goals about our sexuality and intimacy are while we are undertaking the role of caregiving. I invite participants also to assess their own biases regarding the sexuality and intimacy of caregivers. I know that there's a lot of opinions, some very strong opinions on this topic, and especially when we inject the word sex on this scenario, many people just have very, very strong reactions, very strong internal turmoil or mental conflicts regarding the role of sex in the life of a caregiver. So I invite you all to assess your own attitudes and see where you stand and see how you can mitigate some of the challenges created by your own biases in these kinds of situations. And also to give caregivers permission to feel sexual and honor their sexual and intimacy needs, because if there is the need, regardless of what the outcome may be or the actions may be with those needs, we need to be able to not feel ashamed just for feeling those needs, for feeling those feelings, for having them. And we need to find the support that we need through caregiving to give those feelings the proper place. Please, next. So just briefly, obviously caregivers can be paid or unpaid. Caregivers help individuals with disabilities, cognitive impairments, mental or developmental disorders, old age or illness with their daily life and activities. And individuals needing care may be clients, spouses, parents, family members, neighbors, or friends. And you may find yourself in a role of caregiving, and it doesn't have to be a specific role or relationship that you have. You may find yourself in life just offering support as a caregiver to a wide variety of people, whether it is in a professional or in a personal capacity. Next. Some of the challenges of caregiving, and you may know this for if you are a caregiver or have been a caregiver. I have been a caregiver to my ailing and aging grandparents who have passed. And so I have firsthand experience of being a caregiver and experiencing some of these feelings. And sometimes the demands of caregiving can hinder the ability of the caregiver or caregivers to take care of themselves. And that's probably one of the number one complaints that I get from caregiving, is that like all of a sudden we don't have the amount of time that we used to have to devote to ourselves and taking care of our needs. Caregivers are at risk of developing or worsening anxiety, depression, and poor quality of life. That is something to keep also into our awareness, because especially for people who are prone to these issues, but even if you are not prone to these issues, you may find yourself experiencing mental and emotional troubles just as a result of the demands of caregiving. The quality of people's relationships as a result may suffer. And this is something that we cannot ignore. And this is something that is actually a very valid complaint. And this is very real. There may also be a negative economic impact on caregivers. And caregiving may impose mental, emotional, and physical challenges to caregivers, which deplete all of those emotional, mental, and physical resources, because they are all being deployed in taking care of the person that the caregiver takes care of. Next. So some of the challenges of caregiving, the obvious one, the first one is stress. And stress can have a lot of detrimental effects in the body, not only in the physical aspect, but in the emotional and spiritual aspect. The demands of caregiving can put a high amount of stress in somebody's life and in somebody's relationship, and somebody's relationship with self and others, even if they are in long-term committed relationships. There are different manifestations of stress and its impact on the caregiver. And in the next slide, I will go over some of those manifestations of stress that you may have experienced or are experiencing at this point. Next. So some of the four kind of manifestations of this stress can be the caregiver fatigue. I have been there. I have sometimes felt that mentally and physically, I'm just totally exhausted and depleted of energy. And usually this is kind of the first step in this kind of downhill stressful response that we have in response to the responsibilities of caregiving. Compassion fatigue is also another thing that we can experience when we are in situations of caregiving. So going through the trauma of working with those who we are taking care of, that is something that we can experience, and that is something to take note of. Caregiver stress syndrome is the physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion that results in a person neglecting their own physical and emotional well-being, because all of the caregiver's resources are deployed on the one or the ones that they care for. So this is a little bit more in that stressful response when everything that we got is going to and being poured onto the person or the persons that we're taking care of. And lastly, the caregiver burnout, which is when all of this has a cumulative effect and the attitudes towards caregiving change from positive to negative, and sometimes people can also experience some sort of indifference. It's not necessarily that they don't care, it's just that they have reached their maximum capacity and they have extreme fatigue, stress, anxiety, and depression as a result of their caregiving responsibilities. So as you can see and as you can imagine, all of these stress-related responses can have a paramount effect on the sexuality of the people who are in the caregiving role. This can be very demanding, very challenging, and it's very easy to just put the sexual needs aside and prioritize the needs of the persons that we're taking care of, or just feel bad about even having those sexual needs. However, sexual experiences may still be wanted, sought after, or enjoyed while caregiving. Something of a little bit of a background about me is that I also deal with people who are in caregiving situations, and almost on a daily basis, since I deal with a population that is mostly 55 and over. Obviously, these issues kind of come up regularly. And there's always this quandary of like, either I still want to have sex, but my partner is not available, or I'm in a caregiving role and my sexual drive has diminished. And as a result, my relationship is suffering, or I feel guilty about even having these sexual needs because I feel like if I'm in a caregiving situation, I shouldn't be having sexual thoughts or sexual needs at all. So challenges to sexuality and intimacy while caregiving, for instance, are when the partner of the spouse becomes the caregiver, the dynamic of the relationship changes. And this can be very daunting for many people, especially when the caregiver is somebody's romantic partner or long-term partner. And so caregivers may assume roles not performed before, like helping these people with daily activities, going to the bathroom, wiping their private parts, helping them get dressed, eat. And caregivers may feel more like parents than romantic or sexual partners, which affects the ability of these people to connect intimately and sexually. It is true that mostly in the case of women, when women find themselves undertaking more of these roles, more of these parental roles, they feel that their sexual urges kind of diminish and their sexual interest diminishes for this partner because they see this partner more as a child. But I have also seen in clinical practice how children who have taken care of their parents, especially in the opposite sex, for a long time, and later after this caregiving role finishes or ends, obviously it ends usually with a life expiring, then they want to go ahead and have intimate relationships, and they find themselves kind of unable to because all of a sudden they cannot relate to somebody else in a healthy sexual way because what they have been doing for a number of years is taking care of a parent with the same genitals and the same body parts, but in a different capacity. So this can be very confusing. All the levels of stress can hinder the caregiver's ability to enjoy their sexuality. We know when there's performance anxiety, when there's a lot of stress, the body reacts differently. And for some people, this is actually resulting in them feeling less sexual. And in some people, it is them feeling more sexual because they use sex as a coping mechanism. Physical and environmental accommodations may make romance and intimacy difficult. And when I was working on this presentation, I am currently experiencing that my mother has a terminal illness and she is on the last stages of it. And she has a room full of medical equipment. She has a commode, she has a walker, she has a bar that she uses in her bed to come in and out of the bed. And right now she doesn't have a partner, but I was thinking from my clinical perspective, wow, if somebody wants to just be intimate or enjoy some proximity, some touch, just to come to bed with her and enjoy that embrace, it would be quite difficult with the amount of space that this medical equipment takes. So sometimes people may see this as not a romantic environment, and all of a sudden the situation changed, the environment of the room changed, and they cannot see past all that medical equipment and all the diapers and all the pads and everything that caregiving entails to then switch and go and be sexual. Blurry lines of consent and other ethical dilemmas may pose challenges to engage in sexual activity. This comes up every time. I think we have a question along these lines. So we're going to touch a little bit on it later on. Stress, exhaustion, grief, anxiety, and depression can lower sexual desire and sexual performance. So there are women who are not able to lubricate or even feel the sensations and the pleasure of sexual touch because their bodies are so shocked with stress. And same with males, same with men, that they're not able to perform and they get performance anxiety and kind of stage fright just because they are suffering from stress and they're not able to perform and they're not able to have the same stamina and energy that they used to have. There can be a loss of intimate connection with partners during caregiving as well. So whether you are a caregiver that is caregiving for a spouse or a long-term partner or just a partner, or you are in a caregiving role that requires and demands a lot of you, there can actually be a disconnect with sexual partners or romantic partners that are in the picture at the moment. I'm going to also take the opportunity to talk about this caregiving situation with my mother. My aunt is currently taking care of my mother, and she retired about a year ago. She's a very robust and young and beautiful 62-year-old. And she also took care of my grandmother for a number of years. Her and her husband took my grandmother in. They actually fixed the house to make accommodations for my grandmother who lacked mobility and adapted the house to the needs of my grandmother. In 2014, my grandmother passed away, and now my aunt is taking care of my mother who has a terminal illness. And her husband just expressed to her recently that he was very frustrated with the current state of affairs because now my aunt is devoting a lot of time to take care of my mother. My mother is in Florida, by the way. I'm not there with her, so I go to visit, but I am unable to go and perform those duties. And my aunt is happily doing it, and she told her husband that she's just going to do that until the very end, but they are having a little bit of a disconnect in their relationship. When she told me, I kind of saw it with the therapist or clinician's hat, and I told her that, yes, although her intentions and her actions are really commendable, and I am very grateful for her taking care of my mother, I can also see the frustration on the husband thinking, well, we took care of your mother for a number of years and you were devoted to that. And then I thought after retirement and everything, we were going to have this great life. And now you're taking care of somebody else again. So these are the real life scenarios that can pose a lot of challenges for couples during a caregiving situation, regardless of what the relationship with the person that they're caring for is. Next. Some challenges to sexuality after caregiving may differ from the ones that occur while caregiving. Grief may make it difficult to connect to one's sexuality, especially when we're talking about complicated or complex grief. And so there's really no timeline to recover from loss and for somebody to just jump into sexuality and feel sexual again. Most importantly, there may be a lot of uncertainty after caregiving, including how to navigate this new landscape of all of a sudden finding yourself with extra time or maybe being single again after so many years. And how do you navigate the new landscape of dating, meeting new people, forming new romantic relationships? And this is something that I am asked all the time. And I can only suggest a few things for people to do, but it is interesting to me that I am always asked that question. It's like, how do I do this? How do I reincorporate into the dating world when I have no clue about how the rules have changed? I have no clue on how to do this after 40, 45, 50 years of marriage. And all of a sudden, I just find myself kind of available again. And I want to have companionship again. I want to enjoy relationships again, but I just don't know how to do this, how to even begin. And the third, which is one that causes a lot of stress and grief, is the expectations of the family on life after caregiving, including restrictions on if and when the caregiver can pursue romantic and sexual relationships. Many times what I hear is, well, my children don't want me to move on, or my family expects that I at least mourn for, I don't know, 2-3 years. So everybody may have a different opinion on how or when or if this is even a possibility for that person. And I invite, again, us all to examine those biases and really assess our attitudes about this. And ultimately, the only person who knows when they're ready to reinitiate intimacy, sex relationships is the person, the caregiver in this role, in this situation. So some real life scenarios: after a debilitating progressive diagnosis or one that is filled with uncertainty, couples struggle to meet their own sexuality needs. That is something that we see all the time, that when somebody is diagnosed with like dementia, or somebody's diagnosed with cancer, then all of a sudden they don't even know how to navigate that sexual landscape, either because it has changed or because all of the emotional resources and mental resources have been deployed into taking care of that situation, and the sexuality, although it may be there, they just don't know how to assess and how to actually deal with that situation. Having sexual activity with a partner who may be physically or cognitively impaired is another one of the big questions and quandaries that people may have in caregiving situations. And when couples separate, as one has gone to a long-term care facility, caregivers may find this easier or more difficult to navigate their feelings and options when it comes to their own sexual needs. So some may see the opportunity as well, it's kind of, I'm no longer with this person and I have a little bit more time. Or some people may find it even more difficult because it poses more ethical dilemmas. These common questions I am asked on a regular basis regarding these situations. Number one, what is the most compassionate and ethical way to fulfill the caregiver's sexual and intimacy needs? And the second one is, does the caregiver fulfill their sexual and intimacy needs outside of the relationship? We're not going to answer these questions categorically. Definitely, we're not going to talk about the second one. We're going to focus on the first one, and we may focus on the second one on a later chat. So let's talk about the self. Let's talk about us personally. How can we reconnect with our own sexuality? And, you know, me with me, you with you. Well, number one, self-care is the most important thing that you can do for yourself. And I know self-care sometimes is thought of as this kind of new age, almost esoterical term of people who maybe have the time to do self-care, and we're thinking, me having been in caregiving situations, that this is something that I can't even fathom with the idea of self-care, because I don't have time. But it is important. We can't really fulfill the role of caregiving satisfactorily and successfully with maintaining our own sanity and health if we don't take care of ourselves. So it is very important that we devote time, even if it's just a few minutes in the day, one day a week, 1 hour a week, whatever that may be, to do something to de-stress and replenish our own jar. We need to work on our own energy level, on our own enjoyment and fulfillment, and go away for a little while from the caregiving situation so we can go back to it stronger and healthier. We have to see that sexual pleasure is self-care. When we do something for ourselves, especially taking care of our sexual health, that's actually self-care. And so sensual activities that a caregiver can do by themselves while caregiving, number one, is self-pleasure. This is something that is available. Masturbation is always available. Nobody should be policing that. That is something very personal. That is something that belongs to the person and their body and their time and their experience. And if this is something that helps de-stress and enjoy just little moments of joy, then that's something that should be used as self-care. Nurture an erotic mind to stay connected to that sexual mind with consumption of erotic material. And I'm not saying porn, that's something totally up to personal preference, but erotic material can have many forms. It can be just novels, it can be like written material, it can be just kind of more rosé material, not necessarily hardcore. So don't see this as something that is intimidating. Many people enjoy reading something or being exposed to some erotic material that is just not the hardcore that we think of, and it makes them feel good about themselves. Writing erotic fantasies, short stories, and novels. I actually take my, in my clinical practice, take people through some strategies that they can use to get reconnected with their sexual selves. And many people resort to writing erotic fantasies and to just put them in writing, and they become very proficient at it. And eventually they kind of write their short stories and they evolve and they really derive a lot of enjoyment from just writing it, even if they're not sexually active with anybody else. Romance readings, there's a lot of romantic novels, and especially women. I don't want to necessarily categorize women as the only ones who read romance, but mostly that's what you see. So romantic novels are a great way of getting not only those juices flowing, but also disconnecting a little bit and doing something good for yourself. Writing romantic stories, ones that are not necessarily too erotic, but that it's just like romantic encounters and something that is in your mind that is a little bit more vanilla and a little bit more flowery. Exposure to sensual and erotic art. So sculptures and paintings and drawings, anything that is art that depicts the human body and relationships and even sexual acts is a great way to get that erotic mind reconnected. Caregivers who still feel sexual desire should not feel guilty about wanting sexual pleasure. This is again something that is a right of all. So just because somebody's in a caregiving situation doesn't mean that they can't have or can't want sexual pleasure. How to reclaim intimacy while caregiving? Well, practice the 3 T's: talk, touch, time. Number one, what is talk? In the absence of necessarily some sexual activities, more hardcore sexual activities that we can think of, it is very important to stay engaged and connected to the people that we have relationships with while caregiving. And one of the things that I am going to challenge you with today is to communicate with your partner early on the diagnosis and even before, to set out expectations and agreements on intimacy. We don't want to have these conversations. We don't want to think about these scenarios, but we're all aging and we may find ourselves not only caregiving, but being in a situation in which we have to be cared for. And to have some sort of ground rules already established on what or how we want intimacy and sexuality to evolve with our partners, if those situations surface, it's actually very productive. Engage in meaningful conversations and be present with your partner. So you don't have to talk about, you don't have to talk about transcendental issues like, war and doom and anything like that, but you can engage in conversations that are fun and light and airy and just meaningful. Sweet talk can make partners feel loved and connected, and this is always welcomed. Retell romantic stories or funny stories from when you both met and throughout your relationship. And do not shy away from reminding your partner how much you love them and what they mean to you even if you feel that there's a little bit of challenges or disconnect because of the cognitive abilities of the person that you're taking care of, or because the caregiving situation has put you in a position in which it has kind of created a void with a romantic partnership, just continue to talk about it and continue to tell them how much you love them. How to reclaim intimacy through touch. Affectionate touch goes a long way. So, those pats on the cheek and putting your foreheads together and just touching while talking, that goes a long way. Snuggling and spooning, you don't have to do anything, just feel skin to skin, be together, just enjoy it. You don't even have to move. There's no demands. It's a very easy position to be in. Dancing, you don't have to be John Travolta or Patrick Swayze or J-Lo. You can just slow dance. It doesn't matter if you're in rhythm or not. You can just embrace each other and move. And there's a lot of power in moving and music and just reconnecting this way. Regular massage, focusing on the whole body or just a certain body part. Sensual massage, caressing, holding hands, hugging, kissing, scratching lightly or more vigorously, depending on the preferences of the person receiving and doing the touch. And going into mutual masturbation, grinding, drawing onto the skin, or petting, which is masturbating another person in the absence of penetration. Time, how to reclaim intimacy with time. We'll devote time for quality time besides caregiving. So if you're just doing that, it is very important that you take time in your day, in your calendar, to actually put in something else. If you are interacting with the person that you're caring for all the time, 24/7, and just taking care of needs, obviously that's going to kind of create the spiral effect, and you feel like you're never out of it. We'll schedule time for something different, whether it is to just watch something together, listen to something together, laugh about something else, talk about something else, or plan time for intimacy and sex if there is the ability to do so. The only person who can decide when it is time to pursue a new relationship after caregiving is the caregiver. So please, let's empower caregivers to take this decision and make this decision themselves and support them through this process. Loneliness is often a great motivator to pursue new romantic and even platonic relationships. I have heard from people, I just want connection. I just want companionship. Many people think, and for whatever reason, kind of demonize sex and say, well, they just want sex. Well, there's nothing wrong with just wanting sex, but it is much more about connection and intimacy than it is actually about a certain sexual act. Grieving and a new relationship can coexist, as I said before. Sexual pleasure and intimacy are human rights, and they should be afforded to all. And enjoying interests, once put on hold, may offer great opportunities to meet new romantic and sexual partners after caregiving. It is very important to reach out when caregiving becomes too overwhelming. I have been there. I have had to deploy other resources and reach out to people and have my own therapist because of the demands and overwhelming demands of caregiving. And there's nothing to be ashamed of when we need help. Talking to a professional to help with processing the effects of caregiving may be appropriate in many situations. Finding the right support is key to remain mentally and emotionally healthy, and prioritizing yourself during caregiving should be a constant goal. And do not drop the ball on this one. Prioritize your needs. And just as a final remark, at the end of the day, we all yearn for connection, and we achieve that through forming relationships with one another. And many times, nothing can satisfy the hunger of the skin and quench the thirst of the soul like sex in the pursuit of intimacy. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I welcome questions.
Wonderful. All right. The first question that came in through our registration process, Dr. Tanji, is a person with dementia Lewy body is constantly seeking sexual vision that are not real. is constantly seeing sexual visions that are not real. Does this mean that they want to have sex?
So we know that in cases of dementia, there may be something called hypersexuality. And I do not know, there's not a lot of details in this question. I do not know if we're talking about hypersexuality in which this person wants to act out on these visions. Many times it's just people I know from experience kind of either reminiscing, or we do not know if it's them imagining. So I know it can be very confusing. I would say that the best tool to use right now for somebody as dementia actually evolves and progresses is to always check with the provider, with the primary care provider, and check in which stage this person is, to make sure that we're not violating any boundaries, and that what we are seeing in the form of cues is actually what is. And I know it's very hard to determine in people with dementia, but these things can change from day to day. I don't have a categorical answer because, again, I don't have the details of this situation in particular, but I would say if you're unsure, just don't cross certain lines. Again, go back to what I said, always, hug, kiss. There's a lot of activities that you can do without feeling bad about yourself. But if you're unsure if this is something that you even want to pursue, then I would just remain communicative with the primary care and see if this person has the ability to make those decisions to consent sexually to specific sexual acts.
Thank you. The next two questions you may have answered during the answer to that question, but since we do have two more questions specifically related to dementia, I'd like to share those in case you have anything additional to offer. The first one is any guidelines for a spouse caring for a loved one with dementia and how to handle the sexual relationship after diagnosis. The second one is interested in finding out more about intimacy with a spouse with dementia.
Awesome. So one thing that I want to say, because I see this in my practice almost on a daily basis, is that when people think about sex, they immediately think about a penis in a vagina or a penis in an anus, but it's some sort of penetrative act. And it doesn't have to be so. Sexual pleasure can be attained through many different means. And I am very graphic when I talk about these things, so I gave you some ideas before. And sexual gratification can be obtained through all of these other activities that are not necessarily doing the acrobatics and the erect penis and the penetration and all of those things that used to happen before. So just think about the relationship evolving and focus more on sexual pleasure and intimacy and connection than on putting a lot of pressure into specific sex acts. Some people think, well, if it's not this, if it's not a like penetration, then it's not real sex. Or if it's not penetration, what's the point? And I want to challenge those notions and invite people to think outside the box and use their imagination, use your creativity, and just connect through the whole body. And so when the mind is not necessarily there to be able to accurately describe or talk about these sexual encounters, we'll use the body, use the skin to skin contact. That's actually the biggest sex organ that we have, is our skin. We should be having sex with our whole body and not just focused on genitals, grinding on genitals. So seek for other ways for sexual gratification and seek of other ways to remain sexually in contact if you're able to, and if it's at all possible, or if it's something that is wanted. Many times, as I said before, this kind of question removes itself if one person is not willing. So in that case, you have to examine why you're not willing or why you feel that that relationship as you knew it sexually has ended. But don't think that it has to be just this one thing in order to be a valid sexual relationship.
Thank you. Our next question affectionate, loving couple, but no sexual intercourse, both afraid of Viagra or Cialis. Any alternative methods or herbs to turn them on to resume coitus intimacy. He is 2 years post prostate cancer treatment. Horny, and what do you think about horny goat weed?
Okay, well, that was a packed question. I love it. I actually treat a lot of post prostatectomy guys, and so if it's 2 years, my first piece of advice is please continue to seek help. I always advise pelvic floor therapy after prostatectomy because although many times it says that it is nerve sparing, the nerves are actually not spared. And most people who have undergone prostatectomies, they're going to experience erectile dysfunction. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately. The sooner we intervene to bring that function back, the higher the success rates of having at least some sort of erectile function back after prostatectomy. So in that 2-year period, we're kind of cutting it close, but I would advise for them to seek help from a pelvic floor practitioner to go in and rehabilitate that pelvic floor. Many times that results into better function. If you are unsure about where to find a pelvic floor practitioner, you can write me an email and I will direct you to the right sources. I actually have, as part of my practice, a sexual or a pelvic floor practitioner. So this is not an advertisement, but you can find one that works for you in your area, and that goes a long way. But many times, again, we are just fixated on well, this is not what it used to be, and therefore now we can't have anything. And so I see the guys, they're mourning the loss of their erections. I feel for them. I take that very, very seriously. It is a very important part of the work that I do. However, I also invite people, again, to use their creativity and their imagination, because sexual pleasure can be had even if there's no erection. And even if penetration cannot happen via regular means, you can acquire a vacuum pump and pump that erection and have an erection that is good enough for penetration. I know that the pills, the PDE5 inhibitors, are not for everybody, and I can understand the hesitation, but there are other means in the market. I know there are many, many different herbs that promise to deliver some good results when it comes to erectile function. However, when it comes to a prostatectomy, I cannot say that there's anything in the market that really, like horny goat, is going to have a great impact in the functionality of that penis. Maybe on the sexual drive and sexual desire, but not necessarily on function, because we're talking about nerves and muscles and fascia tissue inside of that pelvic structure that has to be rehabilitated. And so there's no herb that will accomplish that. That has to be achieved with clinical interventions.
Great, thank you for that answer. The next question from one of our listeners. I just want to hear what professionals have to say about maybe maintaining an active sex life at a mature age. My husband seems to have no interest at all.
So when there's a mismatched libido, that's when we find like one person wants it more than the other, or one person wants it, the other one is not interested. It is very important to have a conversation, but please, not a conversation when you're trying to get it on. This conversation is better had outside of the bedroom than inside of the bedroom, and really sit down. I know some people are hesitant. Some people just don't want to have this conversation, but really try in a very compassionate and non-accusatory way to ask the partner, like, what is it about intimacy and sex that has changed for you? Maybe they're in pain. Maybe they feel like their erections are not of the quality that they used to have, and they feel ashamed. And every time they attempt to have sex, it's just evidence of how much they've aged or their lack of function, and they just feel too embarrassed to even go through it. Maybe they have low testosterone levels and their sexual drive is just completely floored. So let's look for some options, but obviously we cannot make the other person do something. What we can say, and I encourage people to say this when they have a mismatched libido, is the person who wants the sex is to reiterate, I still want to connect with you sexually. I still want to enjoy sex and intimacy with you. I still find you attractive. I still want to do this for us. And I would want for us to continue to have sex for the remainder of our lives, whatever that may be. And I would like to know if you are also kind of in the same page. And if the person, and sometimes I hear that the answer is like, I am done with sex and categorically this is not something that will happen again, then we have to go through the grieving of the loss of that relationship as we knew it. And then the person has to make other determinations, especially on how to be empowered to take care of their sexuality themselves and not be dependent upon somebody else to satisfy them sexually.
Thank you. Another question that we have that happens to be in the chat is, what are your thoughts about a young husband having intimate relations, including intercourse, with his young wife who is in a coma?
Well, that is one of that gray area that we definitely need to address. And not knowing a lot of the intricacies of this case, number one, knowing that obviously she cannot consent, but we don't know if they had a previous conversation in which she said, if I'm ever in a coma, so I've heard this from people. So this is actually real life scenarios. I've heard it from people who have said, well, if I'm ever in a coma, like he can do whatever, or, if I'm ever asleep, whatever. So I don't know what those agreements have been beforehand that he feels that he can go to that space and he can be there. And I don't know if he has an ethical dilemma about this or not. But so if they had this agreement, then I would say, well, that
was one of my deals that I could have been using. That was one of my deals I could be using.
I'm not sure
Was
that
that
that has anything to do with our topic here. Dr.
okay.
Tanjanika.
I was
I
like,
am
was that
muting
for us?
people. If someone would like to talk, if you would please raise your hand so that we can let you know that it's your turn to talk. Thank you. All right.
So, and as far as the ethical dilemma, again, I don't know what the boundaries of this situation is. So I don't think we have enough details I don't have enough details to even form an opinion about this. But I would like to know what was the premise or the preface to this situation. And if there was consent and agreement before, even if it's not so during that situation, I would like to hear like what the parameters or the guidelines of that situation are before I can even successfully articulate an answer.
Thank you. Another question that we had come in, Dr. Tanji, relates to masturbation. I know that you touched on it a little bit previously, but it talks, they ask, is masturbation good or bad? And I can only assume that they are also, if you could maybe touch on the fact that, in some religions and spiritual situations, people are encouraged not that it's wrong to masturbate. So if you could maybe touch on that a little bit.
So yes, without going into the intricacies of faith and creeds and the topic of masturbation from a clinical, from a medical, from a health standpoint, there's nothing wrong with masturbation. So we know that it has actually very good benefits for the body. It has very good benefits in the case of men to ejaculate for the health of their prostate long-term. It induces relaxation and good neurotransmitters that regulate mood and de-stress and make us feel better about ourselves, if that's the case. And also may lead to better self-esteem and self-confidence, and knowing what we like and we don't like sexually to be able to guide another person into that sexual pleasure. So it has a lot of benefits. Now, I don't have prescriptions for masturbation. If your religion, your creed says absolutely do not masturbate, then that is something that only you can decide if you're going to challenge those notions or not. From a clinical, from a health, from a medical standpoint, there's absolutely nothing wrong with masturbation. and it is not contraindicated almost in any case unless there is probably any problems with pain after masturbating or with orgasm, and situations like that, which are very rare. But ultimately, this is a personal decision. I always say that nobody should be policing your body and your masturbation habits. You don't have to tell anybody. And so if this is something that is enjoyed and the person makes a decision to allow themselves to masturbate and enjoy the pleasure and the orgasm with masturbation, then by all means, make that decision.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Tanji. That looks like that's all the time that we have to answer questions for today. And so I'd like to thank Dr. Tanji for joining us and for her great wealth of knowledge. I'd also like to thank all of our hosts for helping to make today's program a reality. I'd like to thank Seniors Blue Book, the Senior Source, Caregiving SOS, a WellMed charitable foundation, and SBB University. With that, I want to remind you all that you need to complete the evaluation in order to obtain continuing education credits for today's program. And we did put that in the chat. So the link is in the chat and it is also up on the screen for you if you are not sure how to find it in the chat. But usually when it's in the chat, you should be able to just click on that link. And I do thank everyone for joining today's program. And thank you again, Dr. Tanji. We really, really enjoyed the program.
Thank you very much for having me. Hope to see you again next time.